Come on, man. We're talking retro fast food vibes and McDonald's. What is going on, my brother? How are you this morning?
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, there's a lot going on in the world of fast food with McDonald's bringing out their new McDonaldland meal, which is like this crazy throwback to the 70s, 80s, and 90s.
Yeah, and I got to tell you this. So yesterday, our two friends, Phone Master Dre and Madison with a T, actually went over to McDonald's because they were doing the preview video for
hmm
today's show, and they got
hmm
me two tins. I got a
There you
McDonaldland.
go.
I got the tins and all this stuff, and this must be like, I mean, like I said, the thing is we're once again trying to recapture that energy
Yeah.
of 50s, 60s, and 70s. Can you give us some kind of background on what I would call the world building that McDonald's engaged in that it is now brought back?
Exactly. Yeah. So McDonald's always a big part of the McDonald's experience was always fun, and it was obviously a lot of the marketing was targeted toward children and families. Going back to the 1950s with little Chef Speedy with a little hamburger face in the 50s into the early 60s. Starting in 63, the first dip toward McDonaldland, the first step toward McDonaldland is the introduction of Ronald McDonald. And if you've seen the first version of him, it's down in Washington, D.C., Willard Scott from the Today Show. He was the very first Ronald McDonald. He was playing Bozo the Clown at the time. So this local franchise starts Ronald. Other parts of the company notice Ronald. Even eventually, corporate notices Ronald. He evolves. His look becomes closer to what we now recognize. And but eventually, the company decides that Ronald needs friends. And so in 1971, in January of that year, they roll out a campaign called McDonaldland. And there are commercials that go with it. It's kind of very, very trippy kind of song and this sort of world that they create where Ronald lives with a bunch of his friends, including, the Hamburglar and Grimace, who initially was evil. He was known as the evil Grimace. He was obsessed with stealing people's shakes and Captain Crook and the Professor and the hamburger patch and the filet o fish lake. And there's even a volcano on McDonald Land called Mount McDonald Land, which is inspiration, by the way, for the shake. That is part of this deal. So this is in the early 70s. These commercials start running, and eventually these characters translate into quote unquote the real world. We start to see them in restaurants, both on the walls and decorations out front, and then in these McDonaldland play places, which for any kid who grew up anywhere between 1975 and 2005, going to McDonald's and playing in a play place and seeing these characters it is a big part of that experience. I mean, I know a friend who got stuck in the officer Big Mac jail, where you would go inside and go inside this little. There were bars inside of his hat. Really kind of an interesting thing. These were very, very, they were all over the place and a big part of the McDonald's experience into the early 2000s. And then McDonald's began to sort of move away from this. And not just McDonald's. Burger King also had its own like magical characters as well in the 70s and 80s. But times changed and directly marketing to children became a little bit passe. And they wanted to sort of grow up, become adults. I mean, that became sort of the message. We're trying to target not necessarily kids, but older folks. But the funny thing happened along the way to that, which was like the fun of going to these places and the joy and what made it so interesting for so many people, that went away starting in the aughts and certainly in the teens. And so what we're seeing now is something that's very interesting where they're sort of almost McDonald's and other companies too are reversing course and they're sort of listening, I think, to their audiences. I mean, it doesn't take much to go online, look at my book or look at my social media or look at anyone, who cares about this stuff, nostalgia-driven accounts, and see all this goodwill that there is for these characters, for this period in fast food history. And the companies are getting smart to that and saying, okay, we can tap into that and actually use it to our benefit. And that is indeed what McDonald's has been doing over the past few years. You'll recall a couple of years ago, there was the Grimace Shake experience, which was a huge phenomenon. In part, that went viral it had nothing to do with McDonald's. People just sort of glommed onto it, began to do these funny videos, and that's sort of a dream for a fast food chain, for any business. For we introduce a concept, and the public sort of does the marketing for you. That's what happened with the Grimace Shake, and so a number of us in the space were hoping that McDonald's would continue down this path, and we're curious to see what they would do next. And so last month, when they reached out to me and said, "Hey, we're going to roll out this McDonaldland concept, and would you like to write about it the day that we announce it?" And so I couldn't have been more delighted, and that they were doing this. And sure enough, here we are. The McDonaldland meal brings back these characters and brings back this sort of mythical world of McDonaldland for the first time in terms of its totality in decades. I mean, there have been little bits here and there, as I was saying, the Grimace Shake, but this is the first time that you can have that full experience that kids haven't had probably since the 90s or even before.
You want to hear my galaxy brain thought about what's going on here? Okay, I'm going to share this with you. All right, there is a big obsession right now, and I'm not sure why, because other than the cinema and a couple of really great rock and roll albums, there seems to be a lot of people, particularly my age bracket, Gen Xers, who kind of want to force majeure the world back into the 70s. Why anybody wants to go back to stagflation and is still beyond me. But the idea that if they in fact create a stagflation situation, I've often wondered if McDonald's popularity began to wane. Not wane. I mean, of course, McDonald's is McDonald's, but that a lot of the idea of if there was a time period where people began to warn people about McDonald's, saying, "Hey, wait a minute, dude. I mean, it's a wonderful thing to do with your family from time to time. It's not a food group." And I'm wondering if, given the fact that it's cheaper right now and Americans are struggling with their bottom line, that McDonald's might have seen an uptick in business, but that uptick in business could quickly drift away if people felt it wasn't family friendly. So they say, okay, when were we really family friendly? Oh, back in the 70s when we came up with this Howdy Doody inspired universe. Because it's interesting that you mentioned that Willard was, in fact, the original Bozo the Clown, because Bozo the Clown exists in the same sort of constructed universe of the 50s. So much of what the 70s were with movies like American Graffiti was this desperate attempt to get away from, I guess, the Shasta show is what I'll call it, as opposed to the actual thing that 67 to 73 were. And so that people had this idyllic sense of, let's all go see Superman at the movies and then go get some McDonald's afterwards. And by the way, you can do that again. You can go see Superman at the movies and then as a family go hang out with the Hamburglar over at, McDonald's. And I'm wondering if this nostalgia urge is because all of these Xers are in fact becoming parents or grandparents, even in the case of some of them, and want to recapture a little bit of that memory. And so that McDonald's is saying, well, if we're going to recapture the memory. And the other question I have for you is, I call it the Trader Joe's adage, where they will make something that tastes like Cracker Jack the way we remember it, as opposed to the way it actually tasted. And I'm kind of wondering if this nostalgia is in fact what I would call, it really didn't taste this good, but this, it didn't look this good. It wasn't this well produced or this well packaged, but it's the way you'd like to remember it. That's kind of my galaxy brain theory of what is kind of going on here. What do you think?
Right. No, I completely think it's spot on. I would say it's being driven in part by Generation X, and I'm a fellow member of that forgotten generation. There's been a lot of press recently about how Gen X has got the short end of the stick, so to speak, right? But I would say a lot of this, too, is being driven by millennials because these characters were part of that experience, the McDonald's experience, well into the 90s and even into the very early part of the 21st century. And yes, I think once a generation assumes power, I think the things that brought that generation joy as children, become extra appealing. And it's so interesting how you see these sort of layers of nostalgia. So much of what we considered nostalgic in the 70s and what we think of as 70s culture was really a celebration and a retreading in a way of 1950s culture, right? You were right, through the Superman phenomenon, Happy Days, Laverne and Shirley, This whole obsession with the 50s and Bobby Soxers and Elvis Presley, of course, dying in 1977, coming at a time when there was already this fever pitch nostalgia for the 50s. So it becomes sort of layers upon layers, and then surely in the 50s they're probably nostalgic about the 20s and 30s or whatever it is. That's I've always found that to be a very interesting thing. But I do think that this is absolutely being driven by desire for a simpler time. I think when people sort of drive past a modern Burger King or McDonald's, and there are these square, glass buildings are kind of dull. They don't have a lot of color. They're called prisons. You've probably heard of that before. Then that's kind of depressing. And I think this brings back a certain sense of joy and something that's missing from our lives. Nostalgia really, I think, is a part not only about time travel and going back to a simpler time, but it's about putting something back in your life that used to be there, that's missing, that made your life complete, or that gave something to your life that is now gone. And McDonald's is not the only brand, by the way, that's playing this game. Burger King in 2021 brought back a version of their classic sort of 70s logo. The You Rule campaign is a throwback to Have It Your Way, also from the 70s, 1974, 1975, when that was rolled out. And I think we've discussed this in previous appearances. Pizza Hut has gone all in with this, with bringing back their 1974 logo and taking their old school Red Roof legacy restaurants and turning them into these Pizza Hut classics with the channeled leather booths and the checkered tablecloths and all that whole experience that was Pizza Hut back in the day. They've sort of brought it back in these old stores. So this is definitely, it's a cultural need that is out there, and these companies, I think, are smart for seeing that and acknowledging that and embracing it. Everyone wins.
Yeah, and the other thing is too is the fact that it's improving. This is where I will say where I'm not cynical about this is that it's
Yeah,
actually improving the customer service
that's
thing,
right.
because I will tell you this is an interesting thing too, because well, now we're going to get really into kind of corporate
Mm,
strategizing, because the difference
mm-hmm,
between going to say a McDonald's in Santa Clarita and going to a
mm-hmm,
McDonald's in New Orleans was like night and day, because I've lived down here my
mm-hmm,
whole life. My wife and I move out to Santa Clarita. I said if every McDonald's was like this, I'd go more. I mean, if
right.
every McDonald's had literally somebody in the lobby who looked at me and said, "You can order at the counter, sir, or you can order at one of the kiosks," and then announced to
Yep.
everybody there, "Hey, we got a lot of kids and families here. We're going to ask everybody to kind of front and not wait in the table area. We'll get to everybody's order." They're talking to everybody. There are all these young kids behind the counter who are hustling and
Mm-hmm,
busting their butt. And like I
mm-hmm.
said, we'll get into pay discussions later on. That's a different
Sure,
conversation.
sure.
But but there really is something. This really only works if the brand has discipline. If the brand is
Right.
willing to say, if you're not in for this, then maybe you should go someplace else. And I was kind of curious, not that this falls into your bailiwick,
Mm,
but
mm.
how do we kind of impose that sort of brand discipline across the board to make this sort of happen? I mean, we know McDonald's corporate and McDonald's marketing are going to hit a home run. The question is how do
Right.
we permeate this into the culture of the people at the counter themselves? Because if you get that
Exactly.
right, you get everything right. It's how Chipotle made such an inroad into McDonald's world, was because it wasn't just what they were offering, it's the way they kind of presented the service. It's why Chick-fil-A made a big elbow dent in them. This is also a way to kind of counter Chick-fil-A's incursion into their market as well, isn't it?
Oh, I think so too. I mean, and you're seeing another example of a brand that's doing a lot of what you're saying is Chili's, which has had an extraordinary resurgence over the past couple of years. They had a huge boost in profits, 30% revenue increase in the first quarter of this year, which is incredible. A brand that many people had given up for deceased, but in part that is in part because again they are they're very well managed centrally, right? The home office knows what it's doing, and then they make sure that the restaurants are being run by people who are kind of quote unquote chili heads, who really get the brand and are able to promote it. And then they masterfully use social media, which Chili's has done with their mozzarella sticks and those whole videos of people pulling apart the cheese have gone viral. But in the case of McDonald's, yes, I think the experience can vary from store to store. But I do know that this, and I have a little insight from this because my nephews, 16 years old, they're twin boys, They work at a McDonald's down in the Raleigh area, and you really are, when you work for McDonald's, they really do a good job of inculcating you in the ways and what you need to do and what the expectations are. And many of these franchisees, especially some of the powerful franchise groups, the individuals, I mean, their whole lives, everything is really invested in these restaurants. So they do, I think, they do a very good job of trying to maintain those standards and make sure that their employees, no matter how old, no matter what their education level, that they meet that standard, I mean, and so I think McDonald's, of all the change, is pretty good at that. It may hit and miss depending on the location, depending on the franchise group, but I think there's been a big emphasis on that. One thing that I think we've lost a little bit, which this campaign is sort of bringing back, is the fun of going to McDonald's, right? Because
Yeah.
so much they've moved away from the counter experience and getting in line and eating there. It's become about like going up to the kiosk or ordering in the app, picking it up and maybe not even eating it there. At many restaurants that have been remodeled, one of the reasons they're being remodeled is to make the footprint of the dining room smaller to allow more space for the drive-through experience, right? And that's, I think, reflecting, cultural changes, right? And that was certainly emphasized during the pandemic when nobody was really eating at restaurants and everything was about takeaway and drive-through service. Maybe we're living in a new time. Things are changing again, and where we are craving, quote unquote, third spaces, places that we can go. It's not the office, it's not home, but it's a third place, whether it be a church or a restaurant or a bingo hall or any place like that, where we can sort of mingle with other people and have a different experience. And I think there is a craving for that. And I think a lot of this nostalgia isn't just about like cute cartoon characters, but it's about those sensory experiences and memories of being in the restaurant with your friends, with your family, doing something, not focused on your phone and not focused on, whatever else is going on in the world, but simply lost in the presence, lost in the present, enjoying being present, being here in the now. And I think that is a lot of what the reason why brands are doing this and why people are drawn to this. It's taking them back to a much more preferred version of sort of the experience of dining out and shopping and being out in the world.
Isn't it interesting, too, that you could make a case, and I mentioned one of them earlier, that some other business models that have really made inroads into their action, one of which, by the way, has slipped a little bit, but is still kind of there. If you look at Starbucks, who often McDonald's considers their major competitor, you look at Raising Cane's, and you look at Chick-fil-A, all of them on launch and continue to do so really actually use social media in really powerful and clever ways, but they also do emphasize the dining experience. Anybody that's been to a Raising Cane's feels like they are walking into a place that was designed for older people to sit down and have a meal. And even though their kitchens are as big as any other kitchen, the way they are set up in the lobby is they're pushed in a back corner. They're almost like a window. They are as close to a window as you can get, which maximizes the floor space, which I've noticed that every Raising Cane's I've gone to, they keep those places impeccably clean. I mean, they move them like a freight train. And of course, the wholesome image that Chick-fil-A also promotes with its simplicity of menu as well, too. And I'm wondering if, in many ways, this is simply amping it up. It's like basically McDonald's saying, oh, you want to get nostalgic? Hold our grimace shake. You know what I'm saying? I mean, this is kind of that too, that it's not just a kind of back to the future, but it's also a response to the present and its competitors.
Absolutely right. I mean, for McDonald's to see other brands succeeding in the space, and they're the ones who invented it, right? They're the ones who set the standard. And perhaps over the decades, they sort of went away from that. And so now, yes, it is in a way an effort for them to reclaim their supremacy or their role or their innovation in this space. But even Starbucks over the years has moved away from its earlier emphasis on the dining room experience, on being in there, on having some fun. They have a lot of what Starbucks is doing now, and the kind of the new success that they're having is by going back to their roots. I mean, you're seeing once again that emphasis on having the baristas write the name of the customer, on the coffee cup and put a little smiley face, and those little touch points that were part of what made the Starbucks experience special and premium. They're sort of recognizing that, hey, we kind of moved away a bit from this. We should go
Rolando.
back to it because it worked. Yeah.
Rolando, can you stick around for a few minutes? We have to
Yeah.
take a break,
You
and I
bet.
would really appreciate, because this is a conversation I know a lot of our listeners love. I want to make sure that their comments get involved in the action here,
Sure.
and there's some buttons we have to kind of push to get us to the other side of this break. Madison with a T, take us away. We'll head into there. Guys, if you want to get that old school feel, but at the same time get an app, go to truckdown.com. They've been doing it since 97, getting you out of the ditch and back on the road in 50 states and 8 provinces. Man, go to truckdown.com. You got to get up and truck down. We'll be right back.
Check out the new over-the-top lineup at participating Country Pride and Iron Skillet restaurants. 3 gigantic sandwiches loaded with flavor. Try the chicken parm stack, the big country combo, or the ultimate smash melt. The ultimate smash melt. 2 delicious smash burger patties, surrounded by 2 grilled cheese sandwiches. 2 sandwiches in 1. Visit your favorite Country Pride or Iron Skillet restaurant and come hungry.
Available for dine-in only at participating Country Pride and Iron Skillet restaurants inside TA or Petro Travel Centers.
The mission of Wreaths Across America is unwavering, remembering our fallen heroes, honoring those who are currently serving, along with their families, and most importantly, teaching the next generation about the value of freedom. And you can join our mission with a $17 donation that sponsors a fresh Maine Balsam Remembrance Wreath. Each wreath will be laid in honor of a veteran who gave the ultimate sacrifice for our nation. To sponsor your wreath, please visit wreathsacrossamerica.org. That's wreathsacrossamerica.org.
In a video game, if you get enough experience, you level up. And when you level up, you gain more skill. And with enough skill, you beat the boss and win the game.
Sounds a lot like trucking, doesn't it?
Except in trucking, you don't beat the boss, you become the boss. And if you want to be the boss, you gotta meet the boss.
And that boss? Carrier's Edge boss, Jane Jezraoui.
Want your drivers to level up? Carrier's Edge has the training, comprehensive safety, compliance, and best practices on one website. It's a simple subscription with no contract and no commitment. Learn more. Try it out. Level up. CarriersEdge.com.
Hey, come on! We're starting the game!
All right, I'm coming. Wait for me. CarriersEdge.com.
And we are back with more Road Gang Radio, continuing the conversation with Rolando Pujol, telling us all about McDonaldland.
By the way, great to have him aboard. Lindsay is alive and well. We're basically hot on the case, trying to get her on the air, but there is no fault on Lindsay Lawlerland. Speaking of lands, I don't know if you know this, Rolando. My producer, Madison with a T, actually worked at Starbucks, and while she was, in fact, there, they were having a back to Starbucks thing going on there, where they were actually, along with the environmental push, they were actually trying to make the experience, once again, with new leadership over there, more in place friendly as people kind of begin to return. This is a great conversation because our friends out there on the road and the highways and byways driving up and down, they do a lot of stopping in and out. And I had noticed the Pizza Hut thing as well. Talk about nostalgia, because my memories of Pizza Hut are not getting Pizza Hut delivered. That only started to happen when Domino's begins to incur into their segment. I remember going to Pizza Hut, and while you'd wait for your pizza, you'd look at your mom or dad. You remember this and say, "Hey, can I go over the tabletop video game and play some,
That's right.
and play some Missile Command or some Centipede? Can I do that?" I mean, that was the thing. You'd go there, you'd go to the buffet, or you'd order your pizza, and while you were waiting for it, and I don't, like I said, I don't have children. You do, so I don't know what the Little League experience is like, what the experience is like after or before the dance. I don't know any of that kind of stuff. But do you think ultimately that's the game as well, is to get families going in there, and then you're training the next generation of people to like McDonald's and Pizza Hut and all that kind of stuff? That if it's simply people rushing in and out, getting their coffee and their McGriddle, that's not building a customer base for the future.
Absolutely. You're absolutely spot on about that. It's about building brand loyalty, right? And if you're going to have people 20, 30, 40 years from now, waxing nostalgic about McDonald's or Burger King or Pizza Hut, they have to form these very powerful experiences when they're young, when they're 5, 10, 15 years old, right, during those prime formative years. And that is, I think, the genius of sort of going back to these fully immersive brand experiences. A case in point, I mean, look at the nostalgia now. Again, that's been revived for the McDonaldland characters. 3 or 4 years ago, I think the vast majority of people under the age of 20 or 25 had no idea who Grimace was or the Hamburglar. Even Ronald was fading away. And through these campaigns, the Cactus Plant Flea Market a couple of years ago, where they brought out these little McDonaldland characters that had double eyes. Then, of course, the Grimace Shake. The Grimace Shake was brilliant because actually, if you look back on the campaign, we saw very little of Grimace. You go to the store, Grimace's face was not everywhere. His little, it was just basically the concept of Grimace, right? But this created so much excitement among people of all ages, and again, it was very popular on social media where the young dominate. That sort of set the foundation for what this sort of next step that McDonald's is doing now with McDonaldland. So that is creating memories and associations. Now there are people who are 8, 10 years old who, when they're 28 and 38 and 48, will reflect back on Grimace and will reflect back on this period and look back on it undoubtedly with warmth and nostalgia. So I think it's very, very smart. I think a lot of brands noticed they probably were going a little too far in the adultification of the brand and stripping all the fun from the architecture and from the marketing, and they are course correcting in, I think, a very smart way. It's one of their hidden strengths. Why not use it?
Like I said, there's so much here, but I want to kind of share some stuff really quickly. This is so much fun. I don't even know where to begin with these comments online, by the way. Found a nice sit-down cafe at a truck stop in Douglas, Wyoming. Broken Wheel Diner, good eats. Joe J says Pizza Hut was so cool back there. Won't even order from there now. Tara says I grew up watching the wacky adventures of Ronald McDonald on VHS tapes. That's something because she was born in the 90s, the late 90s, and she grew up watching those VHS tapes. Boy, that's a double retro right there.
Right.
Listen to this. Kevin Morey, our friend Trucker Bosun, says, I managed a Noble Romans about 30 years ago. Kids would stand in front of the window and watch them making the pizzas, mesmerized. There is a lot of great stuff, too. Trucker Bosun also says the personal connection of community has been lost except in smaller towns and rural areas. Of course, that reminds me of Dairy Queen as well. This is an ongoing thing here where there's almost... Sometimes, in the case of Steve Jobs, people tell people what they want before they know they need it. But sometimes you recognize that there's a lack or there is something missing from people's lives, and you realize you were the one who took it away. And to some degree, that might be the case here, right?
Yeah, that's exactly what's happening. I think these brands are realizing that they were such an important part of the culture, and maybe they even saw all this nostalgia online in recent years and almost tried to distance themselves from it, and because it's in opposition to their current brand identity. But then they said, you know what, you can't fight it. This is what the people want. And ultimately, in any business, the customer is right. And this is what the customer wants. So give the customer this, and you will actually benefit. It's a win-win.
Yeah, and it could be something exciting because, like I said, at the end of the day, I mean, whether somebody actually, nobody should exist on a diet of McDonald's, nobody should exist on a diet of Raising Cane's, and nor do Rolando or I even endorse the idea of that. But people should be able to go places and not have to race back home and huddle around their table at dinner. The idea of dinner often should be, in fact, what it is. Everybody kind of sitting around making a home-cooked meal. The idea is that these places should be invitations to having a family moment. And like I said, it's interesting, I find, that we have a goofy, very American, very kind Superman, and people are now spending more time at McDonald's and more time at Burger King sitting down and actually having these meals which I think is a force majeure. It's like we're going to force the 70s back into the frame if it in fact kills us. And let me ask you a question. Where do you think the ultimate, I mean, where could this end up? I mean, you're a guy who likes to look in crystal balls, you know, who likes to look so far into the future that you see in the past. Where can you say this?
Well, I'm very intrigued with this because, I mean, McDonald's is taking this campaign to almost about as far as they can take it in a purely marketing sense. This is a campaign that's driven by online marketing, by advertising, but it's having very little physical impact on the buildings themselves and on the actual restaurant experience, right? Most of the new McDonald's are these new kind of austere, very nice looking, very clean, but the different experience and the more homey experience that we remember from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So I really do question whether the next step will be for them to actually start to tinker with the architecture again. I mean, they've gone so far down the road toward these square boxes. Will they now bring some of the fun into the actual physical place? Or is that moment gone? And these nostalgic campaigns are purely that. They're marketing, they live in the mind, but they don't actually translate into the real world. I would be very interested to see whether McDonald's, Burger King, Taco Bell, another iconic brand that we haven't brought up that's been touching into nostalgia as well with their decades meals, where they have signature meals from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and on, and they've even brought back the old cups and the old logos from those decades for those campaigns. But again, it hasn't touched the actual physical architecture. So much of what I do in my travels and in my work is document those traces. So will they go back to that? Will they, or at least bring back an element of that? That will be very interesting to see.
It has been an absolute pleasure having you on for Extra Time. Guys, go to Rolando Pujol over at Substack.com. That is Pujol, Rolando Pujol. Make sure you get over there. He's also on Instagram under himself, by the way. There's some great stuff that we've talked about that's being unpacked over there on his Substack page. We can't wait to have you back again, my friend. Thank you so much for making extra time for our listeners to get their comments into you. I thought you would enjoy that. We really appreciate you.
Thank you. It was so much fun.